So I'd like to start with two heavyweight quotes. The first from Gregory Bateson. The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think. And then Edward O. Wilson at Harvard. We exist in a bizarre combination of Stone Age emotions, medieval beliefs, and godlike technology. I love those two quotes together. Now, as some of you know, Connie Barlow, my wife, and I have traveled North America for the last 10 years. That's all we do. We permanently travel the continent. We've spoken to about 1,600 groups. We speak to all kinds of religious groups and non-religious groups. Here I am getting ready for a Sunday service in the side of our van, and I don't know if you can see the side of it. We've got the Jesus and Darwin fish kissing with hearts between them. Had a biology professor in Lawrence, Kansas, look at the side of the van, and he said, "Oh, great, you just piss everybody off." The core of the message that Connie and I communicate is right relationship to reality. I believe that spirituality are all the practices and exercises that lead us to be in right relationship to reality. In fact, when I use the word God, I'm meaning a mythic name for reality, a mythic personification of reality. So all cultures have helped people have a story of understanding the past, the present, including our nature, and the future that's inspiring. What does an evidential understanding have to add to that, and how might that help us reinterpret and reappreciate ancient wisdom? And all I'll be focusing on this afternoon is our nature, human nature. Now, perhaps the most important aspect of reality to be in right relationship to is the future generations. And so I dedicate this TEDx Grand Rapids talk to my granddaughter, Isla Renee. Notice, however, the picture there. She's resting her cheek on her mother's arm. See the similarity there? I love this picture because one of the things we now know through evolutionary psychology is that humans and ape, there's many things that are universal. One of the things, for example, we know is that morality emerges. We don't need a cosmic carrot and a cosmic stick to motivate us to be good. Empathy and compassion is instinctual to our species because we are social animals. We are group animals, and like all other group animals, this is where love and compassion and care and kindness and consideration, these emerge because of our social nature. Anybody who says that evolution just says we're all selfish doesn't understand this essential aspect of evolution. Now, evolutionary brain science has helped us understand, and technology such as the functional MRI, has helped us come to an understanding that there's certain things that, when we think, we can now map out which parts of the brain are being used. And one of the things that we now have is a pretty clear sense that our brain doesn't show evidence that it was designed by an all-knowing, supreme intelligent designer outside the system that knew exactly how to design the perfect brain for humans to thrive in the world that we today have to live in. Instead, what our brain shows tremendous evidence of is that it was created, if you want to use a theological term, or evolved over millions of years in an additive sort of way. There's the most ancient part of our brain, more recent still, and then the most recent part. The reptilian brain is the brain stem and the cerebellum. This is the root of our physical instincts, our instincts for safety, sustenance, and sex, the 3 S's. Or you could say what this part of the brain really cares about are the 5 F's. Fight, flight, freeze, food, and copulate. Come on, I'm in TEDx. The old mammalian brain, this is the limbic system. This is our social instincts, our instincts for bonding, for kinship, status, and play. You don't find reptiles playing in the way you find all mammals playing. The neocortex, the new mammalian brain, is our interpretive instincts. This is our instincts for meaning-making, for comprehending, and interestingly enough, our instincts for self-deception. If you put cognitive biases in Google, you'll get to the Wikipedia page. You'll see over 25 different ways that we are programmed evolutionarily to deceive ourselves. That's why we need each other. Integrity is not a solo sport. We're going to deceive ourselves. And then finally, the prefrontal cortex, the most recent part of the brain, is the part of the brain that's engaged whenever we need to override our more base instincts. It's all about doing the harder thing. In fact, most things that get associated with spirituality emerge in this part of the brain. Now, Connie and I discovered years ago, this is sort of what I call day language, typical scientific descriptive language, but Connie and I discovered years ago that if you want young people, high school students, college students, and grade school kids to think this stuff is cool and to talk to their peers about it, day language is, you need something more sexy, something more juicy. So we've created some night language animals to help us out here. So we've got our lizard legacy, our fur little mammal, our monkey mind, and our higher porpoise. And again, the lizard legacy is safety, sustenance, the basics of survival and reproduction. Fur little mammal, feelings, emotions, bonding, kinship, status, and play. The monkey mind is always trying to figure things out and comprehend and predict. And the higher porpoise is our sense of higher purpose. It's our sense of God's will or higher power. It's our vows, our promises, our commitments, our declarations, all right here. Now, why we struggle, if you only remember two things in my presentation, I want you to remember these two things: mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements. We live with mismatched instincts and we are surrounded by supernormal allurements. So let's take a look at these. What I mean by mismatched instincts is that our instincts don't match the world that we today have to live in. Our instincts match a world in which our ancestors used to live in and help them survive and reproduce in that kind of a world. But they're mismatched to the world that we today have to live in. And that mismatch can help us go a long way towards understanding some of the things that we find challenging and problematic about ourselves and each other. Now, supernormal allurements. There was a book that came out in 2010 called Supernormal Stimuli by Deirdre Barrett, How Primal Urges Overran Their Evolutionary Purpose. Because in case it's not obvious, French fries are not food. You'll never find anything like this in the natural world. This is a concentration of food-like items that we're evolutionarily programmed to want and to want more of. In fact, Deirdre Barrett says almost everyone will overeat if dining on supernormal stimuli. They've done these experiments with birds where you take the normal egg and replace it with a ceramic egg or a wooden egg that's a little bit brighter or slightly more pronounced markings or a little larger. The bird will always sit on the fake egg, and it never learns its supernormal stimuli. Bees will become addicted to cocaine. Roundworms will become addicted to nicotine. Deirdre Barrett says the most dangerous aspect of our modern diet arises from our ability to refine food. This is the link to drug, alcohol, and tobacco addictions. Coca doesn't give South American Indians health problems when they brew or chew it. No one's ruined his life eating poppy seeds. When grapes and grains were fermented lightly and occasionally, they presented a healthy pleasure, not a hazard. Salt, fat, sugar, and starch are not harmful in their natural contexts. It's our modern ability to concentrate things like cocaine, heroin, alcohol, and food components that turns them into a menace that our bodies are hardwired to crave. I mean, think about it. What was there to be addicted to 10,000 years ago? Were you going to run into some fermented berries? Hard liquor wasn't even invented until 300 years ago. And yet today, we've got all these activities: drugs, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, video games, shopping, internet porn, TV, romance novels, news. All these things that our ancestors never had to deal with. Now, the good news, what I call the gospel according to science when I speak in Christian churches, is that we can move beyond denial, guilt, and resentment to realize that we all have an unchosen nature. We all have inherited proclivities. In other words, we have aspects of ourselves that we didn't choose. We were born this way for really good evolutionary reasons. And what that does is it allows us to honor reality. See, we're not going to have a right relationship to reality if we're dissing or dishonoring reality. We can appreciate the fact that if our ancestors didn't have these instincts, we wouldn't be alive. So let's take a look. We all have cravings for sugar, salts, and fats. Why is that? Well, it's because for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for those things allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. Yet today, we are bombarded with foods that have sugar, salts, and fats. Yet we still have the cravings as though they're rare. It's a mismatch. None of us in this room would be alive today. Nobody watching this would be alive today if some of our ancestors weren't really, really good at putting on weight and holding on to that weight through the harsh winters, through the droughts, through the lean times. In fact, humans that couldn't do that got lost to the gene pool. And our ancestors were so generous, they passed those genes on to us. It's our unchosen nature. One of the things we know about testosterone is that in all men and all women, this is a human universal, the higher the testosterone, the more people take risks and the more they think about sex. In fact, you can take risk-averse people, give them testosterone, and they'll start taking all kinds of risks. In fact, Connie and I stayed at the home of a couple in San Francisco area, and the wife came up to us. We were talking about this topic, and she said, you know, a few years ago, my doctor put me on testosterone patches, hormonal therapy. She said, after 2 days, she said, I couldn't stop thinking about sex. She said, is this what guys have to deal with? Well, the answer is yes, it is. And the reason is because men have 20 to 50 times the testosterone that women do. This is a rock formation. And my wife took the picture. Now, this is typical male behavior, okay? This is a statue of a bison, statue of a buffalo, and a real male adolescent moose. And here we find typical male behavior. Now, guys, before you laugh too hard, at least this bison was three-dimensional. Now, the interesting thing is when status rises, so does testosterone, right? And so what this means is when we become a sports star or a megachurch pastor or we get elected into public office, what this means, among other things, is that we can expect to encounter difficulty with self and others, in part because we have deeper competing drives that often have their own agenda. Now, I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood. I'm not saying that those on the sort of traditional religious spectrum get to say, the devil made me do it. And, you know, others of us that are on the liberal spectrum or not religious say, my lizard legacy made me do it. No, I'm not saying that. Because it may not be your fault, but it is absolutely your responsibility. It's each of our responsibility. Nobody gets off the hook. This doesn't make it easier for men or anyone else to be out of integrity. In fact, in my experience, it makes it much easier to stay in integrity. In fact, let me tell you a true story. When the New York Times Magazine did a feature article on my book, they interviewed this 81-year-old man in northern Florida who had come to one of my church services where I talked about the brain science. Now, again, he's 81 years old. He comes up to me after the church service, and he's practically vibrating. The guy's so excited. He says, Michael, he said, I got to tell you something I've never told anybody. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody who's 80 years old is going to tell me something they've never told anybody, I'm all ears, right? I was like, please tell me. He said, in 1973, he said, I became the vice president of my corporation. Now, it turns out this was a huge corporation. This was a major rise in status, okay? He said, I had no idea until your sermon why my life began unraveling almost immediately. He said, I'd been married for 13 years. He said, I'd never betrayed my wife. He said, but within 6 months of my promotion, he said, I had 5 affairs. None of them knew about each other. My wife didn't know about any of them. He said, it ultimately cost me my marriage. It cost me my job. And he said, I've been living with the guilt and the shame of this for 35 years. He said, I haven't told anybody until I'm telling you right now. He hadn't even told a therapist. Can you imagine how free this guy must have felt? And he said, he told me, it feels like I can let go the boatloads of self-judgment and guilt and start cleaning things up. And to his credit, he did. Between Sunday morning, which is when I did the sermon, and Tuesday night, which is when I did the evening program covering this stuff, he called his ex-wife. He said, I hadn't talked to her in 9 years. He said, I apologize for being such a deceptive, lying sack. He said, and the amazing thing is, I talked to his roommate 3 months later that his depression of the last 15 years had lifted. He wasn't even on the medication anymore. And the interesting thing was, he wasn't even a Christian, but he said he was a Unitarian Universalist, but he said, it feels like I've had a born-again experience. He says, it feels like I've got a new lease on life, and here I'm 81 years old. There was a woman who sent Connie an email. She said, I could never understand my crazy, destructive drives, why I ate so much when I was full, and why I fell in love with the wrong men. But with an understanding of evolution, it now all makes sense. In fact, let me say something about why women occasionally fall in love with the wrong men. When women who are in the presence, most women, about 85%, when most women are in the presence of a very high status male, the women's testosterone levels will spike. So they're going to take greater risks, they're going to think more about sex, and they're not going to be aware of it. They're going to be convincing themselves that they're not being more flirtatious. In fact, there was a woman who came up to me and told me that Bill Clinton's motorcade went right past her house in the early 90s, and she said, had he stopped, I would have had to given myself to him. And she said, I was a happily married woman. Evolutionary psychology can help us have compassion and cooperation. It promotes compassion and cooperation because it explores what we all have in common, human universals. In fact, there was a woman who just earned her doctorate in neurobiology and came up to Connie and said, you know, the more I learn about how the brain works, she said, the more compassion that I have for myself and others. She said, isn't it amazing that science is giving us access to this traditional spiritual virtue? I love this one. The universe becomes self-conscious. Eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce. What's it all about? And we wonder why we occasionally struggle with issues related to food safety and sex. I mean, duh. It takes a lot of courage in this culture to walk into a group of strangers and say, hi, my name is Michael. I'm an alcoholic, or I'm an overeater, or I'm a sex addict, or I'm a gambling addict, or I'm a codependent. What's true is, hi, my name is Michael, and I'm a human being with mismatched instincts surrounded by supernormal stimuli. Right? And that's true for you too. We're all, this removes the stigma. This is a universal. Sending our teenagers out into the world without telling them about supernormal allurements and mismatched instincts is like sending them out 20,000 years ago without telling them about saber-toothed cats. It's crazy. Now, the emotional, practical benefits, I already mentioned, we can have gratitude for the fact that if our ancestors didn't have these very same instincts that we can find challenging, we wouldn't be alive today. And knowing that can help us move beyond denial, guilt, and resentment. We can have compassion for self and others. Healing broken relationships becomes almost a no-brainer. And we can develop a witness capacity that comes from not the witness of sitting on a cushion, but witness from understanding what's driving us, what's under the hood. Now, the only theological thing I'm going to say is this realizes, it naturalizes ancient mythic wisdom. For example, the fall of Adam and Eve and original sin. Prior to microscopes, it wasn't just difficult to understand infection, it was impossible. Prior to telescopes, it wasn't just difficult to understand the large-scale structure of the universe, it was impossible. Well, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, it wasn't just difficult to understand or evolve nature, it was impossible. But what we would have known is what we all know through our experience, which is we all say, I'll do that, but we don't. We say, oh, I'll never do that, but we do. We say, you can count on me for that, but they couldn't. What's that about? Well, the fall of Adam and Eve, original sin, are spot on, accurate, night language about what we can now speak about in a natural, factual, day language way. The Apostle Paul in the Christian tradition said it best. He said, I'm a slave to sin. I really don't understand myself. I have the desire to do what is good, but I don't do it. What I end up doing is not the good I want to do, but what I hate to do. What a wretched man am I. History will show, I believe, that the greatest psychological and spiritual revelation of our time is the understanding that human beings have instincts like all other animals do. And that if we don't understand, appreciate, and respectfully manage, that is, honor and harness our inherited drives, we are bound to be enslaved to them. It's like, what you resist persists. Well, what you can be grateful for, what you can honor, can transform. It can empower you. And this is me at the bottom of Deer Creek Falls in the Grand Canyon. This goes up 140 feet. And this stance is one that is common to all religions. It's a stance of gratitude, awe, appreciation, of honoring. And it's easy when things are going good. But during that time, I actually had cancer, very serious cancer I didn't know about. This was me 3 months later. And even when I was looking at the possibility that I could die really soon, I had what religious people call the peace that passes understanding. And it came from being at peace with my inner and outer world, thanks to this evidential understanding of my nature. And this is the hope that I wish to leave to the next generation. Please share this message with others. Share this TED Talk clip with others, with young people especially. Because like 12 to 18-year-olds, the number one problem that they cite is drug and alcohol issues. I'll give Carl Sagan the last word. because I'm grateful for what science allowed me to stay alive, to see the birth of my granddaughter. This is day one. But I'm also grateful for what science has offered in terms of inner transformation. And Carl Sagan said it best. He said, science is at least in part informed worship. Science is at least in part informed worship. Thank you.